A community includes all populations representing multiple species in the same region. An ecosystem is the biotic, or we could say living, community plus the abiotic or non-living environment. In fact, it's this interaction between the living and non-living components of the system that defines the ecosystem level. On our screen now, we can see a damselfish living in a kelp forest, a fungus living in a forest, and a cactus living in a dry desert environment. All of these organisms interact with other organisms within their living communities. However, they also interact with the non-living environment around them. Each has a unique habitat, which is defined as the physical location where members of the population live. Each also has a unique niche, which includes all of the resources required for survival, growth, and reproduction. The niche includes interactions with other organisms and abiotic factors such as light, temperature, and chemicals. All of these are essential to understanding how an organism lives within its environment. Here's your first challenge question. How many of the items in the following list are abiotic? And your choices are light, water, mushroom, salt, heat, bacteria, stone, cactus, and dog. Please pause your lecture if you don't want to see the answer yet. The answer is 5. Light, water, salt, heat, and stone are all abiotic factors in a given ecosystem. When you're studying for the exam, make certain you understand which abiotic conditions influence the distribution of species in the biosphere. The next section of our textbook is all about climate, and as you can imagine, the Earth is covered with diverse climates all over the planet. These climates are determined by variations in light, temperature, and moisture. The tilt of the Earth on its axis accounts for the seasons, which are opposite in the two hemispheres. A hemisphere experiences summer when it tilts towards the sun. The days are therefore longer and the temperatures are somewhat warmer. A hemisphere experiences winter when it tilts away from the sun. The days are therefore shorter and the temperatures are generally cooler. Because the Earth's surface is curved, the sun's rays are spread over a greater surface area with increasing distance from the equator. Temperatures are therefore coldest at the north and south poles. This thermal map of our planet reveals the average heat difference between the equator and the poles, and we can see that on average it is much warmer around the equator than it is at either of the poles. Air circulation patterns explain why some areas of Earth are moist and others are dry. I encourage you to check out this wind map website, which shows the current wind patterns in a visual way on the United States landscape. The Earth's prevailing winds are directly tied to the Earth's major ocean currents. And on this map of our ocean currents, we can see there's many warm currents represented by the red arrows and many cool or colder currents that are represented by the blue arrows. Warm and cool ocean currents influence coastal climates such as the Bay Area around the College of San Mateo. Mountains also influence our Earth's climate. Most precipitation falls on the upwind side of a mountain range. The dry side of a mountain range is called a rain shadow because it gets a lot less rain as compared to the wet side of a mountain. Many deserts are caused by the positioning of these mountain ranges. All right, here's our next challenge question. Deserts form at approximately 30 degrees north and south of the equator because that's where. Your first choice is soils are the richest. Your next choice is rainfall is most scarce. Your next choice is temperatures are the warmest. Your next choice is earth is closest to the sun. And your final choice is both rainfall is the most scarce and temperatures are the warmest is the best answer. Pause the lecture if you don't want to see the answer yet. The best answer is B. The main reason deserts form is because rainfall is the most scarce. When you're studying for our exam, make certain you can explain the factors that determine climate on our planet today. In the next section of our textbook, we're going to talk about biomes. Biomes are defined as ecosystems with distinct communities of life. The primary factors that contribute to biomes include light, temperature, and moisture. And as light, temperature, and moisture vary across the biosphere, it will lead to the formation of these unique biomes. Biomes are simply ecosystems with distinctive communities of life. Temperature and moisture are the main factors that determine the dominant plants found in each biome on our planet. The vegetation, which is to say the types of plants, can then influence which other organisms can live in each biome type, because in most systems, plants are at the base of the food web as primary producers. Now we're going to look at all the different types of biomes one by one. The first biome is called polar ice, and we can see that it's found only towards the north and south regions of our planet. For each biome type, we're going to see this world map, and all of the different biomes are represented by different color coding in different places on our globe. However, you don't actually need to study this map to understand the biome types. We just need to know the definition. Polar ice biomes are extremely cold, dry, and windy. Phytoplankton are the primary producers. Our next biome is tundra. Tundra is very cold and dry, and it's able to support some small plants. In the previous polar ice, there was no plants, but we do have a very short growing season in which plants can grow in the tundra. However, it's a very extreme environment because the ground remains frozen most of the year. Our next is called taiga. Taiga is cold and relatively dry, and it covers vast areas of land across the northern hemisphere. It's abundant with big evergreen trees such as pines, and only some mammals and birds can actually survive year-round since it gets so cold in the middle of the winter. Therefore, those animals that can't survive must migrate south for the winter. Our next biome type is called temperate rainforest. Temperate rainforest is characterized by mild winters, cool summers, and abundant rain. Life in the temperate rainforest includes lots of large evergreens, such as redwood trees, amphibians, mammals, and fish. The temperate rainforest system is found right here in coastal California, and it includes our famous redwood forests. Our next biome is the temperate deciduous forest. Temperate deciduous forest is characterized by warm summers, cool winters, and consistent rainfall. Trees and migratory animals are very common. Usually it's those migratory animals that came south for the winter from the taiga in the northern regions of the planet. Our next is called the temperate grassland. These grasslands have hot summers, cold winters, and are moderately moist. Fires and grazing prevent large tree growth. Instead, they are characterized by low-growing plants such as grasses. Mediterranean shrublands is another biome type. These are characterized by hot, dry summers, but cool and moist winters. The plants are resistant to fire and are able to survive long droughts. We do find Mediterranean shrublands throughout coastal California, including in the hills around the College of San Mateo. Our next biome is the desert. Deserts are always dry. In fact, they are characterized by dry conditions, not by hot conditions. Many deserts of our planet are actually very cold, and it can even snow. Desert plants must store water to survive these extremely dry conditions, and because it's so dry, most animals are only active at night to conserve water so that they don't lose it in that dry daytime. Many deserts are found right here in California, particularly in Southern California, such as San Diego County. Our next biome type is tropical savanna. Tropical savanna is warm year-round with both wet and dry seasons. However, there's very few trees or shrubs found in the tropical savanna system. Herding animals are very common in tropical savanna ecosystems. Our next biome type is tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforest is usually warm and wet year-round. Because it has these optimal growing conditions, we often find tropical rainforests with some of the highest species diversity found on our planet today. In addition to biomes on land, we also have biomes in the water, and this includes what we call the aquatic biomes. Aquatic biomes include both fresh and marine means saltwater or seawater. As you can imagine, we live on a blue planet, and therefore there's more water on the planet than there is land. Freshwater biomes are where we get all of our fresh drinking water for. Freshwater biomes includes lakes and ponds, and rivers and streams. Lakes and ponds have phytoplankton at the base of the food chain. Zooplankton and fish are the consumers in this very important freshwater ecosystem. Rivers are very important as well. They typically start high in the mountains, and then the water moves its way down towards the oceans. Fast-moving, clear areas that are high up in the mountains have very different members of the community than slow, murky waters found at the base of the oceans, where the rivers pour into that marine system. Marine biomes are those ocean biomes, and it includes 4 distinct types. The first is called open ocean. Open ocean has abundant phytoplankton at the base of the food web. Dead organisms provide food for many of the consumers below. We find large fish that either school, which means they all swim together for protection, or they're large solitary fish on the endless quest for finding food in the open ocean. Our next biosphere is called an estuary, and estuaries are nutrient-rich areas where a river meets an ocean. Organisms must therefore tolerate extreme shifts in salinity in order to survive this type of environment. In the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay is one of the largest estuaries on the entire west coast of the United States. Our next biome is the intertidal zone. These are where we find things such as tide pools, and they are found all along the California coastline. The intertidal zone is defined as the area between high and low tide marks, Organisms must therefore tolerate being exposed or covered up with salt water. And our last biome is the coral reef. Coral reefs are built by coral animals. Algae living in the corals are the primary producers. Reefs have very diverse types of animals that live within them, many of which are being threatened today, thanks to climate change and global warming. Corals belong to a type of animal called cnidarians, and you can see that funny word on your screen here. It's the type of animal that both coral and sea anemones and jellyfish belong to. While we learn these biomes as distinct systems, it's important to remember that water moves continuously between sea and land and provides a vital connection among all biomes on planet Earth. Here's our next challenge question. Which biome is not matched with the abiotic factor that limits which species can survive there? The first choice is taiga and low temperature. Your next choice is temperate grassland and drought and fire. Your next choice is desert and lack of moisture. Your next choice is tundra and frozen soil. And your last choice is all of the above are matched correctly. So this is a tricky question because it asks you to tell me which one is not correct. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. And the answer is all of the above are actually matched correctly. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can list and describe the climate and the inhabitants of each of the major biomes that we've just learned. Species interactions have varying effects on the reproductive success of the participants. The first type of species interaction is called competition. Competition harms both of the participants in the interaction. Our next species interaction is a mutualism. Mutualisms are unique because they benefit both members of the interaction. Our next is commensalism. Commensalism benefits one and does not affect the other. And then the last three types of interactions are parasitism, herbivory, and predation. In these interactions, one of the participants is harmed and the other one gets a benefit. Competition occurs when two or more species try to obtain the same limited resource. For example, some cheetahs might be fighting for an animal that they killed, or a vulture, which is going to try to eat some dead animal, is going to fight with a hyena, which also wants to eat that dead animal. Another example from our book is about these different types of mussels. Two species cannot coexist indefinitely in the same niche. Native painter's mussels compete with invasive zebra mussels for both space and resources. According to competitive exclusion principle, the species that acquires more of the resources will eventually win. Therefore, the less successful species will eventually die out. On the other hand, sometimes multiple populations with similar requirements can coexist in the same habitat. A case in point is the rockhopper penguins. Rockhopper penguins have similar diets, but each feeds at a different time or place in this series of islands off the coast of Antarctica. Competition can therefore result in resource partitioning instead of competitive exclusion. Symbiosis is defined as organisms living in or on one another, The key thing here is that they live in direct contact with one another. Symbiotic relationships can take several different forms, and those forms are called a mutualism, a commensalism, or a parasitism. And all three of these symbiotic relationships are very different from one another. A mutualistic relationship improves the fitness of both partners in the relationship. For example, our textbook gives an example about ants and a special type of plant. The ants live on this acacia tree. They can eat nectar that's found on the plant, which is an important food source. What does the plant get as a reward for these nectar food sources? The plant gets protection, because if an animal comes and tries to eat the leaves off of this acacia tree, the ants will attack in great numbers, biting the tongue of the animal. And so in this way, both plant and these ants get this very beneficial, symbiotic, mutualistic relationship. Commensalism is slightly different. In commensalism, one species benefits, but the other really gets no effect. It gets a neutral effect. For example, many types of plants grow on other plants. If you walk in a forest, you'll see there's mosses and ferns and lots of different plants that grow on the sides of trees. It helps those plants to grow on the side of trees because it gets them off the ground and closer to the sun to do photosynthesis. However, the tree doesn't care that something's growing on it. The tree doesn't get any benefit, but it also doesn't get harmed. Now, the fancy word for when a plant grows on another plant is called an epiphyte. Epi means upon, and phyte means plant. Parasitism means one species benefits, but the other species has a very bad or negative effect. For example, sometimes humans can get infected by roundworms, and one type of roundworm infection can lead to a disease called elephantitis. Here we can see someone is suffering from this elephantitis disease. Feeding relationships also link species together. For one, herbivores eat plants, and for two, predators eat prey animals. However, sometimes the prey fights back. Here we can see an example of a snake that ate a lizard, and even though the lizard's being swallowed, it's still biting and holding on to that snake's body. Plants and prey animals have adaptations that defend against being eaten. The first example is camouflage. In camouflage, the organism resembles the environment in which it lives. For example, this living stick organism is a type of insect, and it looks just like the plants that it lives on. Our next example is warning coloration, in which a highly poisonous animal advertises that it's poisonous so that no one tries to eat it. And an example of this is a poison dart frog. And a third example is mimicry, in which a animal that's not dangerous mimics a dangerous animal. In this example, we see spiders that look like ants. And you might think, well, why would a spider want to look like an ant? Remember how those ants gang up on any animal that attacks it? Ants live as colonies, and they will fight to the death to protect each other. So spiders, over evolutionary time, have come to mimic these ants in this tropical rainforest, and then we can see mimicry in action. Sometimes adaptations in one species select for adaptations in another. For example, two species evolve together in a process called coevolution. Here we can see a special type of orchid and a special type of moth. The orchid can only be pollinated by this moth, and this moth can only pollinate this orchid because it has such an extremely long tongue. Our next term is a keystone species. Keystone species are central to maintaining diversity within the community that they belong to. Sea otters, for example, eat sea urchins that would otherwise destroy the kelp forest if the otters didn't keep the population in check. The kelp forest provides habitat for countless numbers of species. If the kelp forest goes away, then hundreds of species would be lost. Without sea otters keeping a check on the sea urchins, all of these species could possibly be eliminated. One of the ultimate keystone predators is the killer whale, which actually isn't a whale, but it's one of the largest types of dolphins. And these predators keep seals and large fish populations in check. Here's our next challenge question. How many of the interactions in the following list are beneficial to one species but harmful to another? So we've got herbivory, mutualism, parasitism, competition, predation, and commensalism. And your choices are 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. And the answer is 3. Herbivory, parasitism, and predation are interactions in which they are beneficial to one but harmful to the other. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that, among other things, you can contrast the competitive exclusion principle with resource partitioning. Ecologists use 2 measures to describe a community's diversity and species composition. The first is species richness. It is the total number of species that occupy a given habitat. For example, if a community has lower species richness than another community, then we would say that it has a lower number of species. If a community has extra species in it, then it's going to have higher species richness. Our next is called species evenness. Species evenness describes the proportion of a community that each species occupies. So this one is slightly different. A community with high species evenness simply has equal numbers of each species living within that system. For example, if a community has one species that dominates, then it's going to have less species evenness than a community that has a more or less equal number of each type of species. Ecologists measure species evenness and species richness over time to determine if a community has changed. Succession is defined as a gradual change in a community's species composition. The question we can ask ourselves is, how do communities change over time? For example, after a fire comes through a forest, or after a volcano erupts and all of that black lava flows down the mountain, it can completely wipe out the community, and therefore the community must change over time. Primary succession occurs in an area where no community previously existed. The events of primary succession are highly predictable. Each species changes the habitat. These changes therefore determine which other species can live in that area. Pioneer species are defined as the first organisms to colonize a new area, such as bare rock. One example of an organism is a lichen, and we talked about lichen in chapter 15. Decomposing pioneer species establish the soil of the new community, and then the first plants can move in, such as herbs and weeds. Over time, soils continue to form, and larger plants ultimately take root. Secondary succession occurs when a community is disturbed but not completely destroyed. Thanks to frequent disturbances on our planet, few communities reach climax conditions in which diversity and composition are stable. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can describe succession, how does it work, and which plants are involved. In the next part of our lecture, we're going to talk about how ecosystems require constant energy input. Many organisms rely on other organisms for energy. An organism's trophic level describes its position in the food chain. The term trophic means nutrition. Here's a very simplified food chain of organisms that live around the College of San Mateo campus. We've got a variety of native wildflowers, which are eaten by rabbits, and then rabbits can be eaten by mountain lions. These colored bars represent stored energy, and we can see that plants at the bottom of the food chain have much more potential stored energy than does the mountain lion. The plants are called producers. The rabbit would be the primary consumer, and the mountain lion would be a secondary consumer in this simplified food chain. However, food webs are a much more realistic way to represent feeding relationships, in which many of these organisms are interconnected to one another. Let's start with the plants. All around the College of San Mateo campus, which you might remember from previously in the lecture, we said it was a Mediterranean shrubland, we have lots of different shrubs and flowers. These plants are the producers, and they form the first trophic level of the system around campus. Two things happen to plants. One, they get eaten, or two, they die. Who eats the plants? The primary consumers. Primary consumers, therefore, are the second trophic level, and it includes things such as deer and rabbits. These would be considered the herbivores in our system, and about 10% of the energy from the first trophic level transfers to the second. There is much more energy that is stored in that first level than there is in the second. That's why when you look outside, you see lots and lots of plants. You don't see lots and lots of bunnies. Who eats the herbivores? The secondary consumers, which form our third trophic level. These are the predators. And around the College of San Mateo campus, we have mountain lions, bobcats, and coyotes. We rarely see them, though. They are very elusive. Also think about how energy is transferred from each level of the food web to the next. Only about 10% of the energy is transferred from the second to the third level of our trophic structure. So therefore, there's very little energy to sustain large populations of these higher level predators. However, these predators are essential for maintaining balance in our system. Ecosystems therefore require constant energy input, and it's usually light from the sun that fuels these reactions by providing energy for photosynthesis. Higher level consumers generally increase overall biodiversity by simply keeping these populations in check. At first you might think, oh, if we have mountain lions, they're going to eat everything and then there'll be less biodiversity. But in fact, it's just the opposite. Without mountain lions, there would be very little biodiversity because we would not have balance in our system. And in fact, here is the night vision camera on the edge of the College of San Mateo campus. And we can see we caught a young mountain lion in the middle of the night, patrolling and looking for food. Harmful chemicals may affect food webs on our planet. Chemicals that are fat-soluble and do not readily degrade can quickly ascend a given food chain. We say that these chemicals biomagnify, which is to say they become more concentrated at the higher trophic levels. If a biomagnifying chemical is harmful to a top predator, species compositions through the community might change over time. Therefore, predators are absolutely essential at maintaining biodiversity. When you're studying for the exam, make certain you can identify the trophic levels in a given food chain. Make sure that you understand that only 10% of the energy from one level actually transfers to the next. The last part of this lecture is all about chemical cycles. Chemicals cycle within ecosystems. Remember, we know that all organisms interact with their non-living environment, and that non-living environment includes things like chemicals. The fancy word for this is a biogeochemical cycle, which can trace some of these ecosystem-level processes. Water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus are essential to life. For the test, we will just have to learn the water and carbon cycle within ecosystems. Producers and consumers take in water from lakes, rivers, or the ground. Water vapor transpires through pores in the plant leaves. That is to say, the plants soak the water in through their roots, and then the water travels through the plant and out the leaves through those pores. Cellular respiration also produces water, some of which is lost to the atmosphere as water vapor gas. Water vapor also accumulates in the atmosphere through evaporation from all of our freshwater sources and marine water sources found on our planet. Water finally returns to land as precipitation, both in the form of rain and snow and ice. Carbon is another important cycle. We know that carbon is a part of all organic molecules. Carbon dioxide is the main inorganic storage reservoir for carbon on our planet. Through photosynthesis, producers use carbon dioxide to make organic molecules such as sugars. Producers use some of these organic molecules for cellular respiration, and in breaking down those sugars, some carbon dioxide is released, in which it can enter back into the atmosphere and back into the carbon cycle. Herbivores and predators consume organic molecules. Cellular respiration releases carbon dioxide. Decomposers are also a part of the equation. They can use organic molecules that are stored in dead things that are in the soil. And they also can release carbon dioxide through cellular respiration in some cases as well. All chemical cycles are similar in that there is a cycle between an abiotic reservoir, which is usually the soil or the atmosphere, and a biotic reservoir, which is the organisms that live on our planet. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can define what features do all biogeochemical cycles share on our planet. The last part of this lecture is all about two kingdoms and a virus team up to beat the heat. Scientists have discovered a partnership between a plant, a fungus, and a virus. The plant is a grass that grows in Yellowstone National Park in the soil next to hot springs. the soil gets extremely hot, over 150 degrees, which would kill most living things. However, the three-way partnership between these three organisms allows them to survive even though the heat is so high. Without the virus, both the fungus and the plant cannot survive. Plants exposed to high temperatures can survive with a virus-infected fungus, but if it doesn't have the virus and the fungus, then it will not remain healthy. This alliance gives each party a selective advantage in this highly challenging environment.